everyone, welcome back to another video. So in this video, I wanted to talk about whether or not you needed to know Linux in order to get a job in DevOps. Let's go. So a couple days ago, I asked a question on Twitter, this one, asking people whether or not they thought that we truly needed Linux in order to get a job in DevOps. And I got an overwhelming amount of response, especially given that I have like 50 followers or whatever. And I figured, why not just create a video about this and give you guys the answers I got. All right, so I got three types of responses. The first type is the world runs on Linux, so learn it or die. Now, obviously, I was paraphrasing. Nobody said you should die if you don't learn Linux, but that's the general idea. And to an extent, I agree with that. The world, a lot of the DevOps, a lot of the workflows run on Linux. Your actions to compile and deploy your code run on a Linux machine for the most part. A lot of jobs require some knowledge of Linux. So truly, given how many jobs out there actually run on Linux and use Linux, not learning Linux puts you at a huge disadvantage over everybody else who would know Linux. So yes, it's a necessity, and you probably should learn Linux in those cases. We also got answer number two. Number two is, well, you don't need to know Linux as well as you would Windows for a technical job and all that stuff. All you need to know is really some shell scripting to run some of those basic commands, so setting permissions or copying, moving, removing files and directories and all that stuff. So that's not a lot of knowledge, but it is knowledge that you need to have. You need to have enough basically to be able to do your job. What I would recommend you do is try to deploy code yourself, run pipeline, and try to memorize all these commands that you run in shell scripts to run these pipelines, because chances are you're probably going to run the same commands in a professional environment. And then we got the third answer, which I really like. And that is, it really depends on what you do. We are moving more and more towards OS abstraction. When you run things in serverless, then obviously the server does not matter at this point because you're in an environment that doesn't have a server. So Azure Functions, Google Functions, AWS Lambda, these are serverless services that really don't require much Linux or operating system knowledge in general. That's one case. The second case you have is containers. We're moving more towards Kubernetes. We're working towards containers and more containerization, where the OS is the bare minimum. So instead of having a full-blown Linux operating system you have to manage, then you only have a very small, very finite image that you're using. And so, yes, you would need to know some Linux, but not that much because, well, you're not really doing much with the OS. And then you obviously have full-blown virtual machines. If you deploy software on a virtual machine, then you should be quite familiar with the Linux operating systems. And one answer that I didn't really get much is, well, if you run in a Windows environment, then you don't need to learn Linux. And that is 100% correct. You could find yourself in a Windows environment, and in that case, well, Linux is not very helpful to you. It's not a very common thing, but it is something that can happen. So really, in conclusion, what I would say is, yes, you should learn Linux. As a professional in cloud computing, you should learn some Linux. You don't have to be an expert, but you should be familiar with Linux. You should be familiar with shell. You should be familiar with manipulating files, but you don't have to be an expert in Linux. If you already write some shell scripts or manipulate files on your computer, a Mac especially, You don't have to do much more learning than that. Now, you will probably learn more things later as a professional, but you don't necessarily need to learn more than that. So I will post a link to the thread down below so you can read the answers yourself. Feel free to follow me on Twitter too. I'm trying this whole Twitter thing. I've never really done much more social media than YouTube before, so let's give that a shot. And if you want to know more cloud skills that you should learn, here is a video for you about cloud skills you should learn to not be left behind, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.